Hey everyone, I'm Ian McCarthy of Lifting for Life, and tonight I'd like to take a few minutes to talk to you about broscience and science, and why I think they are perhaps closer together than a lot of us believe, but at the same time still very far apart. And I would say in opening this video that in reviewing, or really just thinking about my last video immediately after making it, it struck me that it was probably overly long and entailed more explanation and really repetition than was necessary. So in this video I'd like to jump right into the core of the discussion. And to the point of broscience and science perhaps being closer together, more similar than a lot of us believe, I'd really like to just illustrate this with a few quick examples. The first is that of protein distribution. Very frequently the quintessential broscientists will say you need to eat 6 meals a day for the sake of increasing your metabolism and providing a steady flow of nutrients to your muscles and so on for muscle protein synthesis. Mechanistically, that's not correct, but just in terms of the practical recommendation itself, that's probably pretty close to what is optimal given what we know from Stu Phillips' research. He's not the only person to do research on this, but he's done a lot of it, showing that the amount of dietary protein which can be used to synthesize muscle protein at any one time is actually pretty limited, and for that reason, if you want the greatest quantity of protein you're consuming to be used for muscle protein synthesis, it needs to be distributed fairly evenly throughout your day, a day, over something like 4 or 5 or 6 boluses. So what we see is that in practice, even though the explanations are different, and many of the explanations on one side are incorrect and others are actually in line with the evidence, again, the practical recommendations are close, if not identical. Similarly, if you look at training frequency, quintessential bro says, okay, you train everything once a week and you need a minimum 5 days or whatever it might be for recovery, but if you want to prioritize a body part, you want to train it more often. And this isn't just a few more educated bros saying this. Jay Cutler has said this, Phil Heath has said this, Ronnie Coleman, from my understanding, trained a lot of his body parts more often than once a week for much of his career. And so what I think this indicates is more of a convergence on the question of training frequency than perhaps some folks in the evidence-based community realize. They will say, okay, the bros just do the 1 time per week thing, not realizing that in at least some fairly frequent cases, they move closer toward the 2 times per week or even 3 times per week frequencies that we most often see recommended in the evidence-based community. So again, regardless of the mechanism or the explanation which underlies that or those recommendations, they're closer together than perhaps we realize. A final one is the pump. Classic bodybuilder thing, high rep work, isolation movements, get a good pump, mind-muscle connection, etc. This is really important. And on the basis of scientific evidence, we now understand that metabolic stress is actually a mechanism for hypertrophy or a cause of hypertrophy, probably a weaker one, but nonetheless it's there. So what we have, it's a little bit different in that you don't have one practical recommendation and then another and they're converging. You have essentially the same practical recommendation. Traditionally, I don't think a mechanism has really been offered by the bro scientist who says this. Well, actually, I take that back. Traditionally, they would say this is beneficial because it causes more nutrients to be moved to the muscle tissue, whatever it might be. As you can see, I'm not really the greatest bro scientist. But science now tells us, okay, we know of metabolic stress and that it does increase the overall hypertrophic response, something like this. And so we have a scientific justification of this recommendation, and again, we see a convergence here. So, again, if we want to just put it as one statement, I think that in practice, we perhaps have more in common than, again, a lot of folks think. There might even be a desire on the part of some people to really make a point of saying there's this massive distinction between what the bros are doing. The bros are over here doing this stupid shit. The bros are so ignorant doing all of this nonsense. And we're over here. And certainly in some cases, I think there is that kind of distinction. Let's say someone doing intermittent fasting, consuming 2 meals per day, their training frequency, they train everything every day, etc. But I don't think that negates the point that there is more convergence than a lot of folks believe. However, I was going to leave the video there initially in thinking about this, while sleeping. But what struck me is that it's important that we still note there is a huge discrepancy between evidence-based practice and broscience generally. Obviously, folks are going to kind of land all over the spectrum. People who we would call broscientists, some better, some worse. And that is not so much the practice, but more the underlying general methodology or system or philosophy which results in these recommendations. In other words, broscientists have a certain set of beliefs, and scientists or folks in the evidence-based community have a certain set of beliefs, and they may be, in some cases, 60, 70, even 80% the same, but they arise as a result of different systems. So in the case of the broscientist, I would say that we have tradition. In other words, we do this because it's always kind of been done this way, and trial and error. Try this, okay, it doesn't work, this person died, maybe we don't want to continue recommending that folks do this. We tried this, it's working really well, let's continue doing this, etc. I would say tradition is probably one of the very weakest or worst reasons to do stuff, and trial and error can actually be tremendously valuable, but it's not the gold standard. What we have in the evidence-based community is, truthfully, I do think there is a lot of, we do this on a basis of, on the basis of tradition. Maybe folks don't realize how much that happens, but we're all human, it does happen. Trial and error is still there because, again, it's a useful tool, and it fills in the gaps, by the way. This is kind of a topic for another evening, but it fills in the gaps that are present in the scientific literature. But then what is imported that isn't present in the case of the classic broscientist is the understanding of the literature, or at least, because again, we're human, folks are going to have, we have limited time and energy, and no one person is going to be cognizant of everything in the literature. At least there's a genuine attempt to read it, understand it, be familiar with it, etc. So that's the difference, is there is really the addition of a higher quality, more reliable means of generating beliefs, practices, recommendations. So that is where I think the genuine or greatest, biggest, most significant distinction lies. And so I think there are a couple of practical takeaways here. One I think I've already at least alluded to. Recognize that there probably isn't as much of a difference as a lot of us think. So I would encourage, my hope would be that this results in more in the way of mutual respect and understanding, and also, and again, this is something I could discuss at length in another video, but recognize that even though the broscientist might have mistaken, they will recommend things which are actually valuable on the basis of inaccurate mechanisms that they kind of make up. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily wrong in their recommendations. So perhaps we should be more open-minded toward things proposed by broscientists. We shouldn't simply say, well, that mechanism sounds like nonsense, so it's bullshit. The mechanism might be, the recommendation could be legit. And this is something that's been discussed by Greg Nuckols, and so I don't want to say I'm the first person to ever talk about this. But the other implication is that perhaps we should talk more about this actual distinction instead of just spending a tremendous amount of time and energy on whatever it might be. No, eating more often isn't going to increase the thermic effect of food. Ha ha ha, you're such a moron. Why do you believe that? Have you ever read a study? Do you believe in science, etc.? Maybe we should talk more about that general underlying methodology, which in the case of evidence-based practice, is more reliable. So again, perhaps instead of just focusing on what we do in practice, these particular recommendations, etc., and I still think those discussions can be valuable, by the way, there should be more of a discussion of how do we generate these beliefs? Which system is most reliable? In what way can we generate recommendations such that we are wrong least often, etc.? And I think that would be a really valuable addition to the kind of discussions I see absolutely all the time. Just, oh, you're anti-GMO, you're a moron. Okay, well, what is the basis for that? Like, how did you get to that conclusion? What is the system that you're using? And, what are the underlying philosophical principles which ultimately result in you thinking, okay, if you are anti-GMO, you're a moron, etc. And this might actually be the point of greatest controversy in this discussion, because I imagine if you were to show this video, up to this point to almost anyone, they would agree with a lot of it. Maybe the kind of really radical bro scientists would think that the account I've given of them isn't accurate or something like this, but something I perceive, once again, this is something I could elaborate on at length in another video, is the system used by folks in the evidence-based community is not as good as it could be, and it's closer to what we see on the bro science side. And this results in this, it isn't, I'm not sure it's incoherent, but there seems to be an inconsistency between folks holding to a certain set of beliefs, which is mostly correct. Let's say someone's right 80% of the time, 80% of what they say about dieting, training, supplementation, lifestyle, etc., is genuinely in line with the evidence, but interestingly enough, they get there through dogmatism and closed-mindedness and a reliance on tradition, and not approaching the scientific literature objectively, really viewing it through their particular lens of, this is what I believe, how can we justify this with science, as opposed to, let's wipe the slate clean and just look at this objectively. And I say that knowing that it's really not possible. Like, a person can't actually do that. But at least making a very real attempt. Making a very real attempt to put on the table their own beliefs and principles and so on, the things they even think are totally uncontroversial, and really scrutinizing those in the way that they would scrutinize that said by someone writing for Flex magazine. So that might actually be the most important point in this entire video, is that their evidence-based folks really need to hold themselves to their own standard. So it can't only be, let's talk about how much of a moron and a dogmatist and so on food bait is. We need to turn around and look at ourselves in the mirror in the same way. And that goes 100% for me. And I could make 15 videos discussing things I used to believe even 6 months ago that I think are total bullshit might be an exaggeration, but probably wrong. Because I've taken those things and I've allowed them to be, or I've really compelled myself to question those things. And in some cases, I say, yeah, that's, I think it's really solid, actually. It stands up to the very best criticism I can come up with. And in other cases, I say, wow, I was way off on this. And not only that, but I made videos about this, and thousands of people watched, and damn, like, sorry. And actually, now that I have the opportunity, sorry, I'm actually saying this to you as the viewers, or saying this to you as a viewer of this video. So I kind of went off in a direction I wasn't quite expecting in the final 5 minutes or so of this, but I hope it was valuable. And I would love to hear, read, see your feedback, so please let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you found the video valuable, interesting, amusing, anything like that, please do give me a like, share it on Facebook and so on, the various websites I discussed in the last video. My social media accounts links are in the description box below, so follow me all over the place. I actually put out more content now on Snapchat than anywhere else. I do about 20 to 30 videos or photos on my story every day, and then recently I've been able to answer every single question that folks have sent me there, but I'm everywhere else as well. So hit me up. Thank you so much for the support. I appreciate you watching this excruciatingly long video, and I hope you all have an amazing night or morning or whatever it is, wherever you are. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.